Marcus Williams was 39 years old, an HVAC technician with a salary of $61,000 a year, and his world was about to be dismantled by a single piece of mail. It arrived on a Friday at 4:18 p.m., tucked between a flyer for a local pizzeria and a water bill. The envelope was a stark, menacing shade of beige, with a clear plastic window showing his name and the address of the small Eastland bungalow he had poured his life into. The return address was the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. His heart, which had been humming along with the satisfaction of a successfully repaired commercial air handler in uptown Charlotte, began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He stood on his porch, the scent of recently cut grass hanging in the humid Carolina air, and felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a dread that had nothing to do with the weather. He had lived in this house for 9 years, 7 of them, before he'd even met Bria. He'd bought it as a foreclosure, a wreck with good bones on a quiet street. He'd spent every spare weekend and a significant portion of his modest income turning it from a shell into a home. He'd replaced the roof himself, laid the hardwood floors with his father, and planted the gardenia bushes that now bloomed fragrantly by the porch steps. For the last 2 years, it had been their home. Or so he had thought. He ripped the envelope open. His hands, usually so steady when calibrating a thermostat or soldering a copper pipe, trembling slightly. The document inside was dense with legal text, but a few words leaped out at him, sharp and cruel as broken glass. Petition for dissolution of marriage, exclusive possession of the marital residence, and a reference to a quitclaim deed filed and recorded. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. Bria was divorcing him, and she was claiming sole ownership of his house. The house his father had helped him buy, the house that held the sweat of his own labor. A wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled inside, dropping the rest of the mail onto the small entryway table, a $150 piece from a discount furniture store he'd assembled himself. He sank onto the sofa, a comfortable but worn $800 sectional they'd bought together, and stared at the papers. A quitclaim deed? He'd never signed such a thing. He would remember signing away his own home, wouldn't he? The thought was a frantic question mark in the fog of his shock. What was happening? This had to be a mistake, a terrible, bureaucratic error. But deep down, a colder, more terrifying certainty began to form. This was no mistake. Was this why she had been so distant lately? Why her phone was always angled away from him? Why conversations about the future felt like navigating a minefield? He thought back, his mind racing through the past few months, searching for a clue, a warning sign he'd missed. He was a simple man. He fixed things that were broken. He believed in honesty, in putting in the work, in the quiet integrity of a job well done. He believed the foundation of a marriage was built on the same principles. He had no idea how wrong he was. The weight of the betrayal was a physical thing, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He looked around the living room, at the shelves he'd built, the walls he'd painted, the very air he'd conditioned, and felt like a stranger in his own life. Then a memory surfaced, faint at first, then sharp and clear. His father, on his wedding day 2 years ago. The memory was so vivid it was almost a haunting. His father, a quiet, proud black man with hands as calloused as his own, pulling him aside just before the reception. He'd pressed a thick, sealed envelope into Marcus's hand. It was a simple, standard number 10 envelope, but it felt heavy with unspoken meaning. "Son," his father had said, his voice low and serious, "I hope you never have to open this. I truly do. But life can be unpredictable. Put this somewhere safe, and you only open it if she files." Marcus had been confused, a little hurt even. "Dad, it's my wedding day. Bria is wonderful. His father had just squeezed his shoulder, a sad wisdom in his deep brown eyes. "I know, just promise me. Open it when, and only when, she files." Marcus had promised, tucking the envelope away and promptly forgetting about it in the haze of newlywed bliss. He hadn't thought of it since, until now. She filed last Friday. What could you do when the person you promised to build a life with had been secretly digging a grave for your future together? We see stories like Marcus's all the time, where good, hard-working people are blindsided by calculated betrayal. If you've ever felt underestimated or taken for granted, let me know in the comments. And stick with me to see how a father's quiet love, recorded in blue ink, became the weapon his son needed to reclaim his life. The life Marcus had built with Bria was a carefully curated facade of domestic normalcy, but looking back, the cracks were always there, plastered over with his own determined optimism. He earned his $61,000 a year with his hands and his mind, diagnosing complex HVAC systems in the towering glass buildings of uptown Charlotte. He came home smelling of machine oil and honest sweat, wearing his standard issue work pants that cost $45 a pair and steel-toed boots that ran him $120. Bria worked in marketing for a mid-level firm, earning closer to $85,000, and she came home smelling of a $250 bottle of Chanel perfume. She saw his work as a means to an end, the end being the mortgage payment on the house she increasingly referred to as her investment. One Saturday morning, about a year into their marriage, Marcus was under the kitchen sink, a $15 basin wrench in hand, replacing a leaky gasket that cost less than $1. His deep brown skin was luminous, even in the dim light of the cabinet. "Almost got it," he called out, his voice muffled. Bria walked in, holding her phone. She was dressed for brunch with her sister Tasha, in a vibrant floral dress that cost $350. "Marcus, honey, can you please try to be done with that soon? Tasha's picking me up, and the sound of that clanging is giving me a headache." She didn't offer to help. She never did. She saw the house not as a series of systems to be maintained, but as a backdrop for her life. "And please," she added, her nose wrinkling slightly, "make sure you clean up properly. I don't want grease stains on my new quartz countertops." The countertops had been her idea, a $7,000 upgrade he'd paid for out of his savings, money he had earmarked for a new work truck. He just grunted in response, tightening the final nut. The leak was fixed. That was what mattered to him. Their financial lives were a constant, quiet tug of war. He managed their household budget on a meticulous spreadsheet, tracking every dollar. She saw budgets as suggestions, guidelines to be bent. He drove a 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it, paid off years ago. She leased a new white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car with a monthly payment of $580 that made him wince every time it was debited from their joint account. "It's about image, Marcus," she'd say, tossing him the keys so he could move it out of the driveway. "In my world, you can't show up to a client meeting in that." She would gesture vaguely at his Camry. The insult was never direct, but it was always there, hanging in the air between her expensive handbag and his worn-out Timex watch. The most critical scene, the one he now replayed in his mind with sickening clarity, was their wedding rehearsal. It was held at a trendy restaurant in South End, a place with exposed brick and $18 cocktails. The bill for the dinner alone was over $3,000, paid for by her parents. Marcus felt a little out of place in his $300 suit, surrounded by her family and friends, all polished and effortlessly affluent. His own family was there, quieter, observing. His father sat beside him, his gaze missing nothing. Halfway through the dessert course, Bria's sister Tasha slid into the seat next to him. Tasha was Bria, but sharper, with harder edges and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She placed a sleek leather portfolio on the table. "Okay, lovebirds," she said, her voice a little too loud. "Just one tiny piece of boring paperwork to get out of the way before the big day." Bria smiled at him, a dazzling, brilliant smile that could have powered the city. "It's just a little something for the house, baby. A marriage gift form. It just puts everything in both our names officially. As a married couple. A fresh start." Marcus, full of wine and happiness, felt a swell of love for her. It seemed like such a romantic gesture. Tasha slid a single document and a pen out of the portfolio. It was dense with text. "Don't even try to read it," Tasha laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just standard legal stuff. Sign here, here, and here." She pointed to 3 yellow sticky tabs. "Think of it as the first official act of your marriage." He looked at Bria. She squeezed his hand under the table. "It's for us," she whispered. So he signed. He didn't read the words quitclaim deed. He didn't see the clause relinquishing his rights. He just saw his beautiful fiancée, the promise of their future, and the smiling faces of their family. He had no idea he was signing his own eviction notice. Across the table, his father watched, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. Marcus didn't notice. He was too busy being the happiest man in the world. He had no idea what was coming. The cruelty didn't start with the legal filing. It had been accumulating for months, a slow poison seeping into the foundations of their marriage. The escalating betrayal was a series of small humiliations, each one designed to make him feel inadequate, to grind down his confidence until he was nothing more than a signature on a dotted line. One evening, about 6 months before she filed, Marcus came home from a particularly grueling job. A condenser unit on a rooftop in the middle of July had failed, and he'd spent 10 hours in the blistering Charlotte sun getting it back online. He was exhausted, covered in grime, and all he wanted was a hot shower and a quiet dinner. He walked into the kitchen to find Bria and Tasha sitting at the island, sipping glasses of chilled white wine that probably cost more than his work boots. They stopped talking the moment he entered, their laughter dying in their throats. "Oh, Marcus," Bria said, her voice laced with a kind of weary pity. "You're home." Tasha looked him up and down, a barely concealed sneer on her face. "Long day saving the world from lukewarm air?" she asked. Marcus ignored her and went to the sink to wash his hands. "It was a tough one," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "The Williamson building downtown." Bria sighed dramatically. "Well, please. Whatever you do, don't sit on the new chairs in your work clothes. They're Italian leather. I had them special ordered." The chairs were a stark, minimalist white, costing $900 each. They were profoundly uncomfortable, but they looked good on her Instagram feed. "I was going to shower first," he said, his voice flat. As he turned to leave, he heard Tasha whisper to Bria, not quite quietly enough, "I just don't know how you do it. The smell and the grease. It's a good thing you have your own career. With what he makes." Bria didn't defend him. She just laughed, a soft, tinkling sound that felt like a slap. He stood in the hallway, unseen, listening. That was the moment he knew something was truly, deeply wrong. The outrage began to smolder in his chest, a low, banked fire. The conversations about money became more pointed, more dismissive of his contributions. They had a joint account for household bills, into which he deposited a set amount from every paycheck. Bria was supposed to do the same. But she was always forgetting, or short this month. One night he was paying the bills at the small desk in their spare bedroom. He noticed the joint account was dangerously low. "Bria," he called out, "the mortgage is due next week, and we're about $1,000 short in the account." She walked in, scrolling through her phone, unconcerned. "Oh, just cover it from your savings, honey. I had some unexpected expenses." He later saw the unexpected expenses on the credit card statement: a $1,200 handbag from Burberry and a $600 spa day with Tasha. "We talked about this," he said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. "This account is for bills. It's for our home." She looked at him then, her eyes cold. "Marcus, please don't lecture me about money. It's so unbecoming. I handle the important finances. You just make sure the lights stay on." She turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there with a stack of bills for a life he was apparently only allowed to finance, not participate in. The final, most devastating scene of betrayal before the legal notice came 2 weeks before she filed. It was their second anniversary. Marcus had planned a simple, thoughtful evening. He'd cooked her favorite meal, shrimp and grits, a recipe passed down from his mother. He bought a respectable bottle of wine for $25 and a small, delicate silver bracelet for $150. He set the table on their back patio, overlooking the garden he so lovingly tended. He lit candles. When Bria got home, she walked right past the patio door. "What's all this?" she asked, not with delight, but with irritation. "I told you, Tasha and I are going to that new place in Myers Park tonight. It's a networking thing." He stared at her, the wooden spoon still in his hand. "You didn't tell me that, Bria. It's our anniversary." She rolled her eyes, a gesture of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Marcus, it's a Tuesday. We can celebrate this weekend. This is important for my career. Don't be so dramatic." She went upstairs to change into a sleek black dress that cost $800. He stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of garlic and thyme filling the air, the candles flickering on the patio. He looked at the two-place settings, the carefully plated food getting cold. She didn't even acknowledge the gift-wrapped box on the table. When she came downstairs, she kissed the air somewhere near his cheek. "Don't wait up," she said, and then she was gone. He ate his anniversary dinner alone, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that he wasn't just losing a wife. He was being erased from his own life, methodically and cruelly. He just didn't yet know that the paperwork for his erasure had already been signed. The memory of his father's words, "Open when she files," cut through the paralysis of his shock. Marcus pushed himself off the sofa, his movements stiff, robotic. The thick envelope. Where had he put it? His mind, a frantic librarian, flipped through catalogs of memory. Not the safe deposit box at the bank, that was for joint documents, a place Bria had access to. He needed a place that was his alone. And then he remembered. He walked to the small office at the back of the house, a room filled with his things, his technical manuals, his framed HVAC certifications, and against the far wall, his father's old desk. It was a heavy oak desk, scarred and stained from 50 years of use. His father, a meticulous bookkeeper for a small construction company his whole life, had passed away a year before the wedding. Marcus had inherited the desk, a piece of furniture that was more of a monument to his father's quiet, steady nature. He had put the envelope in the bottom left drawer, tucked beneath a stack of his father's old, pristine ledger books. A place of honor. A place of safety. He pulled the drawer open. It smelled of old paper, cedar, and his father's integrity. There it was. A plain white envelope, his name written on the front in his father's strong, familiar script. His hands were shaking again as he picked it up. He could feel the thickness of the papers inside. He used his thumb to break the seal, the sound of tearing paper unnaturally loud in the silent house. Inside there was no letter, no dramatic confession. There was only a thin blue ledger book, identical to the ones his father had used for work his whole life. And on top of it, a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. He unfolded the paper first. It was a notarized statement dated the week before his wedding. It was signed by his father. It read, "To whom it may concern, I, James Williams, attest that my son, Marcus Williams, has been the sole financial contributor to the purchase and upkeep of the property located at 2351 Eastland Drive, Charlotte, North Carolina, from its purchase on May 12, 2012, until the date of his marriage. The enclosed ledger contains a complete record of these contributions." His breath hitched. He opened the blue ledger. The first page was titled, in his father's perfect block lettering, Eastland Property Ledger, M. Williams. And then, page after page of meticulous, handwritten entries. Each line was a testament to his father's quiet, watchful love. He had recorded everything. May 12, 2012. Check number 1043 to Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds, $2,500. Down payment. May 15, 2012. Check number 1045 to Wells Fargo Home Mortgage, $98,700. Initial mortgage, principal. The entries continued, month after month, year after year. Every mortgage payment recorded with the date, check number, and amount. June 1st, 2012.